You know that moment when a group of friends starts talking about money and one person in the room goes quiet? They don't interrupt, they don't correct anyone, they don't mention what they earn, what they own, or what they're planning next. Sometimes they even downplay things. If someone asks about their work, they give a short answer and move on. If someone jokes about expensive habits, they laugh and change the subject. And from the outside, it can seem a little strange. People often assume things about them. Maybe they're secretive. Maybe they're overly cautious. Maybe they're just not that ambitious. In a world where success is often displayed loudly on social media, in conversations, in subtle competition between peers, someone who keeps things quiet can easily be misunderstood. But there's a pattern here that most people don't notice. Because some of the people who speak the least about money are quietly building the most stability around it. And there's a psychological reason for that. There's a certain habit that tends to show up in people who slowly accumulate wealth without drawing attention to it. It's not a strategy you'll usually see explained in financial advice videos. It's more subtle than that. It's the habit of psychological distance. Not distance from money itself, but distance from the emotional noise surrounding it. Behavioral economists have studied this for decades. When people make financial decisions under social pressure, comparison, status competition, fear of missing out, a different part of the brain becomes dominant. The reward system lights up. Dopamine responds to attention, approval, and the possibility of being seen as successful. In those moments, spending doesn't just become a transaction, it becomes a signal that says, I'm doing well, I belong, I've made it. But some people develop a different relationship with that signal. Research in behavioral psychology suggests that individuals who create a small emotional gap between their financial choices and social validation tend to make more consistent long-term decisions. Their brains treat money less like a performance and more like a resource, which changes everything. Because when money stops being a performance, the urgency disappears. There's less need to prove things in real time. And often, this habit doesn't appear randomly. It develops slowly, shaped by experience. Sometimes it begins in childhood. Maybe someone grew up in an environment where money was uncertain, not necessarily extreme poverty, but enough unpredictability that they learned early on how quickly circumstances could shift. Or maybe they watched adults around them struggle quietly with financial stress, noticing the tension even when it wasn't spoken aloud. Over time, the nervous system adapts to patterns like this. The brain becomes more attentive to long-term security than short-term recognition, not because the person consciously decides to live differently, but because stability simply feels safer than attention. Other times, the habit forms through repeated experience in adulthood. Moments where someone realizes that appearances can be misleading, that the loudest signals of success are not always the most reliable ones. So they adjust. They speak less about money, they show less, they observe more, not out of secrecy, but out of comfort. It's important to say that this pattern isn't better than other ways of living. Some people enjoy celebrating their success openly, and that can be a meaningful expression of pride and joy. Different personalities respond to recognition in different ways. But for the quiet wealth builders, the absence of display isn't about restraint, it's about alignment. Their decisions simply feel calmer when they're made away from the noise of comparison. There's also a subtle paradox inside this pattern. The same habit that allows someone to build stability can sometimes make them invisible in conversations about success. Others might underestimate them, misread their ambitions, or assume they're playing small. And strangely, that invisibility can become a kind of advantage. Because without constant social attention, their decisions stay private. Their plans have space to unfold slowly. Growth happens quietly. The outside world often notices it much later, when the results are already stable. If you recognize yourself somewhere in this pattern, the tendency to keep things understated, to move carefully rather than loudly, it might be worth remembering something. This doesn't mean you're hesitant, it doesn't mean you lack confidence. It may simply mean that your mind learned to treat stability as something worth protecting. And in a world where attention moves quickly and comparisons are constant, that quiet relationship with money can create a kind of calm most people rarely experience. Not because one way of living is superior, but because different minds build security in different ways. If this way of thinking feels familiar to you, there are other patterns like this, small psychological habits that shape how people move through the world without even realizing it. And once you start noticing them, certain parts of your own behavior begin to make a lot more sense.